So ek wil vir julle welkom sê by vanmiddag se webinar wat gaan oor woede. My naam is Jana van den Munckhof en ek fasiliteer vanmiddag se paneelgesprek. There are 7 panelists participating, but before I introduce them, just a few guidelines for today's session. So vandag se paneelgesprek geskied in beide Engels en in Afrikaans. En ek wil jou aanmoedig, as jy dalk iets gemis het of nie verstaan nie, stuur vir ons 'n boodskap in die chatbox en ons sal ons bes doen om dit vir jou te vertaal. After the panelists have been introduced and have shared their perspectives, there will be an opportunity for discussion and questions. Maybe just at this point, if we could ask you to perhaps switch off your camera and to mute your microphone. It will just help with the flow of data, please. Everyone except the panelists and myself. Omdat ons dan nou gaan geleentheid gee vir gesprek en vrae nadat die paneellede gesels het, wil ons vir julle aanmoedig om dan nou ook julle vrae in die chatbox te stuur. Ons sal dit ontvang en dan sal ek die vrae aan die paneellede rig. Dalk net 'n paar waardes voordat ons begin. Dis waardes waaroor die paneellede ooreengekom het wat ons graag met julle wil deel. So elke persoon praat vandag vanuit hulle eie konteks. Dit beteken almal praat in die eerste persoon. Ons praat vandag oor woede. En daarom wil ons ook vir mekaar sê, dis okay om kwaad te word. And then also, it's important that we are able to sit in the discomfort of honesty this afternoon. Perhaps just a short introduction to what led to this afternoon's panel discussion. Die laaste paar maande was moeilik vir meeste mense en alhoewel baie mense goed gevaar het om aan te pas by die vinnig veranderende omstandighede, is hierdie aanhoudende onsekerheid tog besig om sy tol te eis. A wide range of emotions are being experienced by many people at this stage. But one of the emotions that we realized is maybe one of the main emotions that are being experienced right now is anger. Nou in die kerk het ons die ou tradisie van Lament, wat ook uitdrukking gee aan ons woede. 'n Konstruktiewe uitdrukking van woede is nodig sodat transformasie kan plaasvind. Vir ons om eerlike en rou gesprekke hieroor te kan hê, is dit nodig vir 'n verskeidenheid stemme wat saam praat vanuit 'n diversiteit van kontekste. So om ons te help met hierdie gesprek, het ons die volgende mense genader om deel te wees. En ek wil hulle graag voorstel. Ons is baie opgewonde om hulle hier te hê en ons sien uit om hulle perspektiewe ook te hoor. Eerste aan die woord is Etienne van der Walt. Now, Etienne is an accomplished neurologist with a special interest in cognitive and behavioral neuroscience. He's also an authority in early childhood brain development. As a thought leader, Etienne is deeply immersed in gaining understanding of the potential cross-disciplinary application of the field of neuroscience. Thanks, Etienne. Jy is aan die woord, Etienne.
Okay, ek gaan hallo almal en baie dankie Jana, dis baie lekker om saam te kuier. Ek gaan maar in Engels praat, and I have 5 minutes, and I hope this little introduction didn't count. There's so much to say when you think about neuroscience, and I have the privilege to just lead you into this this concept of neuroscience or the concept of anger really, and by using neuroscience, which of course is a great neutralizer. So I'm not going to have a particular stance, but rather just give you a bit of perspective, at least from what we've learned from our understanding of what happens when you have anger and what's happening in the brain-body system. And of course, from that perspective, what happens in an individual, but also is there some way we can gain understanding of what that how that actually plays out within a system, in larger groups, in cohorts, and in nations, if you may. So, and of course, that is a big jump. So let me just first of all say something about the brain-body system. If you, by and large, if you think about the brain-body system, it's all about staying alive, survive, and thrive in life. Now, there's a Maslowic hierarchy there. So our brain-body systems is basically continuously and unconsciously, during wake and during the sleep state, continuously receiving information and paying attention to information that is coming in from the external environment. We make internal representations of what is out there, and that is our reality. And that reality is based on what we know of what's going on in our own brains, which basically means that our reality is formulated based on a belief system, a mindset, a worldview. You can go on. Those are all based on deep-seated memories that comes right from ancestors, right through our own development, early childhood, and then right to this day. And so what we make is really an internal representation of what is out there, and then we assign a value to every single incoming cue to decide whether what is coming in, how important that is for our survival, whether it will keep us alive, whether it will enable us to survive, which means we procreate, but also whether it will enable us to thrive in life. Now, thriving is not being happy and hoo-ha. It is actually a state. If you thrive, you move into a baseline, relaxed physiological state. It means that your brain-body system is gone into a system in a state where it has got a low heart rate, a low blood pressure, the metabolism is proper, everything is happening well, and we are being maintained. We are actually kept well. The cancer cells are being killed off, and the inflammatory cells are being taken. Everything that's going to make us ill is removed, if you may. And so we need a baseline relaxed physiological state continuously, and then we operate from that as a baseline to overcome challenges through an acute stress response. So an acute stress response is a good thing for us. Every single thing that challenges our system is seen as a threat, and that threat is either small or medium or large, if you may. It's perceived to be small or medium or large, also based on our internal representational system. And so now we have to appropriately then overcome the challenge that comes our way every single day, thousands of times a day, maybe even. And we have to actually assign the right value. And then, of course, assign the right kind of energy to the task to overcome the challenge. We either run away from it, or we challenge it and we overcome it, or we ignore it, which of course is something optimism does. It sort of says, it's okay, I will overcome this. And so it challenges it with the right kind of energy at the right time. It's just an example. So this is the way the system works, right? So the system is a complete threat reward response system. And this threat reward response system is very well established in the brain. It runs right from the most basic part of the brain stem, to the whole frontal lobe, in a so-called neurolimbic pathway through the emotional system. Emotion means E is away and motion is move. It effectively means that through emotion, we move away from where we are, away from what we perceive that is bad towards what is good. We actually avoid threats 4 to 6 times as readily as we maximize rewards. We are fear-driven. It is unconscious. And so the idea that we continuously have to actually maximize our rewards and overcome the threats is a continuous process. If we can't do it, we go into a stress response, and if we can't overcome it continuously, we go into chronic stress. And chronic stress is the state that I believe South Africa has been in for a very long time. We have been for a very long time in having an inability to overcome our challenges in our brains as a nation. And we are, within a systems perspective, the fractals, the cells of a much larger organism, which eventually, when you have organs, you have systems, you have an organism, if you may. South Africa is the organism. We have different cultures who are different systems we have different subcultures who are different organs, and we are individuals within families that are actually cells within this bigger system. And this system as a whole has chronic stress. It means that we simply, the amygdalas, which is part of the brain, the collective amygdalas are being activated and continuously moving us into that stress response. Now, bringing this back to anger. What is anger and frustration? They're very much related. And I'm sure you're going to talk about that. Some of the speakers will speak to this. But by and large, anger is a result of a result of a threat that is not going away. The threat that we have is a fear that this expectation that I'm having, that is an expectation that I will be able to overcome this challenge, which requires optimism, has now been overcome. It's been overridden. There's an override. And so I developed the anger in my system because of the fear response that's taken over, because of the inability to continuously believe that we will overcome the challenge, or that my expectations will be met, and that what I'm experiencing now will be something of the past. So the reward anticipation is overridden. And you only need a small little thing. It's a bit like, you know, putting in one little ant in that one little last straw that's going to actually tip the whole balance. You don't need a big thing to actually push the whole system into an anger response, given that you are in a chronic stress response state, and given that the resilience, the collective resilience of the organism, the nation as an organism, is so challenged. So the current view that I think that we should have from a neuroscientific perspective is that the nation and the different subcultures, and of course different organs, are having more trouble than others. This is not a one size fits all. Are all under massive pressure of different natures. This has now actually pushed the capacity of resilience, which means this is the ability to overcome the challenge and to still move us into that baseline relaxed physiological state. This has been override. It's been crumbling, and because of the final straw, whatever that is, you see the anger being a result of this organism under severe stress and strain. I think that's. I would love to continue, but I think I should stop there. Jana, was that 5 minutes?
Thank you, Etienne. Thank you very much. Yeah, I think that just helps. Yeah, thanks for that. Our next speaker is Cas Wepener. Cas doseer liturgie en homiletiek in die departement praktiese teologie en missiologie op Stellenbosch. Hy het enkele jare gelede 'n boekie getiteld Kookpunt of Boiling Point gepubliseer wat oor woede en gelowiges se respons op woede handel. Cas gesels met ons oor dominees wat te midde van woede moet preek. Dankie, Cas.
Thank you, Jana. Thanks for this wonderful opportunity, and it's exactly what I want to do tonight. I want to speak about preaching. I'm a preacher, I'm a dominee, and I also teach it, so I want to reflect on that. What I'll do is I first want to talk about how Dutch Reformed dominees, how they preach about anger when they do that. And then secondly, I want to say a couple of things about the homiletician from Yale, Nora Tisdale's approach to this kind of preaching, which I think can be helpful for us in these days. Firstly, how do we preach when we do it? A couple of years ago, Henny Pieterse and we did a study, and we looked at how do Dutch Reformed dominees preach about anger and on anger when they do that. And it goes as follows, namely, firstly, they state that there is the reality. In other words, anger exists, they say, and that the anger is bad for a person's health. Then they continue and they say they can provide the remedy, and the remedy is to take that anger to the liturgy, and specifically in prayer in the liturgy to God. And then thirdly, they say from this reality and the remedy, there is a result. And the result is that when you do that, you may experience love, trust, respect, better communication, as well as peacemaking. Okay. So what we did is we thickened that plot. We think they're already doing a very good job when they preach on anger. We used grounded theory, so we thickened that with some literature, and we developed the following theory, homiletical theory for this. And firstly, we say that we can move from preaching on anger to angry preaching. A preacher should, we say, not only objectively preach on anger as if it is a theme to be dealt with and that is removed from us, but we should also embody that emotion in meaningful ways in the pulpit. I want to quote Eusebius Maake here, who wrote on this, and he says he refuses to accept this only as an intellectual challenge. He wrote, he says, they are real material challenges, and it's unhelpful and frankly inhumane to only examine inequality, poverty, racism, misogyny, violence, and other ills dispassionately. Okay, so from preaching anger to angry preaching, then secondly, angry preaching needs angry listening, we said. And angry preaching on anger should also be provided the chance to deliver this kind of sermon, but such a sermon should not be viewed as a kind of an embarrassment when she or he becomes emotional. So as the preacher embodies anger in the pulpit, so the hearers in the pews must also be able to be listeners to anger. I would love to, in the question time later, to expand on the importance in our day of not only the expression of anger, but also angry listening. I think it's very important. Then thirdly, we said angry preaching fits within an angry liturgy. Now this kind of sermon, it never stands alone, and it should be accompanied by good liturgical rituals. I mean, I can imagine how a sermon like this can flow over into a lament psalm. Now, anyone listening to what I'm saying now can hear that what I'm saying is potentially very, very dangerous. Therefore, I now want to move to some of Nora Tisdale's guidelines. She wrote a beautiful book on prophetic preaching a couple of years ago. And she says it's no use to just deliver these sermons. It's also important to try to be heard by your hearers. It's very easy. I think all the dominees listening, they would know it's very easy to upset a congregation. It's much more difficult to actually get a message over and that your hearers remain seated and listen to you. I mean, if we just shout at the people, you cows of Bashan and you brood of vipers, at the end of the sermon, you will be the only person left in the congregation. So what she says is there are 10 points that she highlighted for a pastoral approach in this regard. I'm only taking 3 of them quickly tonight. The first one is to speak truth in love. A preacher may only preach an angry sermon if he or she can say that they genuinely love the people whom they are preaching to. The whole idea of prophetic preaching, the whole idea of angry preaching, the motivation behind it is God's love. God's anger, God's holy anger is a sign of God's care, of God's love because of injustices. And therefore, the mode of this kind of preaching should also be speaking truth in love. Of course, if a minister is already in a very good relationship with his or her congregation, this kind of preaching is much easier to do, and they will trust her a lot easier. Okay, secondly, she talks about standing in the shoes of another and viewing the world from a different perspective. The idea is that you as a preacher invite the hearers in such an angry sermon to walk in the shoes of someone else. I think many people, they've read the novel To Kill a Mockingbird. and the whole idea of walking around in someone else's skin. So whether you like it or not, or whether I like it or not, it's very important to beforehand ask myself, why is Steve Hofmeyr angry? And I must try to understand it. Why is Eusebius Mackayser angry? I must try and understand it. Why is Max de Pre or James Kirkpatrick or whoever, or the Gatvol movement in Cape Town, why are they angry? I think it's very important to, as part of the preparation process, try and walk around in the skin or the shoes of as many angry people and different angry people in South Africa as possible whilst preparing this sermon. A third one, she talks about standing with the congregation rather than opposite the congregation. Many of our politicians will tell you that the gravest homiletical sin that you can commit in the pulpit is to talk about you instead of we or us. According to Walter Bregeman, there are three voices operative in biblical interpretation. He talks about the voice of the text, the voice of the preacher, and the voice of the congregation. And then he says, and she says, it so often happens that I as a preacher, I team up with the text. Say I team up with Amos, and then I stand over and against you lot listening to me in the congregation. And she says it's much more helpful if an angry preacher stands also with his or her congregation over and against the text, so that the biblical text also speaks to the preacher, him or herself. To me, and I'm summarizing, I think there's always an ongoing oscillation in our preaching between challenging and affirming. We definitely need angry preaching, but we cannot have angry preaching every Sunday. There should also be good affirmation. But, and I think this is extremely important, undergirding any of our preaching in these days should be, when we do angry preaching, we should know that angry preaching is an expression of love. It's an expression that God, in God's holy anger, gets angry because God cares about what happens to us and to the people in this world. So our sermons, I believe, and our angry sermons should witness to exactly that love of God. Thank you, Jana.
Thank you, Kas. Thank you for your perspective. Looking forward to the questions coming up. Our next speaker is Maake Masango. Now, Maake is professor at the University of Pretoria and a former moderator of the Presbyterian Church. He's a member of the executive of World Council of Churches, a member of the executive of the All African Council of Churches, and president of the ATI-SCA. He's also a former executive of the World Alliance of Churches. Maake, how do we pastor in the time of the coronavirus in terms of loss and anger?
Thank you. Thank you very much, and thank you for the invitation. I live in two worlds. The world in Alexander and the world in Sandton, where I am helping in the churches. And there are two different dynamics that have developed since COVID-19. One is in Alex, as March arrived, the quarantine came, anger rose, and it reminded the people of the days of apartheid. And anger was fierce because they did not understand the curfew. They did not understand why cigarettes are taken off, why alcohol has been taken, and why they should stand in their homes and have the scarves around their neck. So that was the developing of the anger. In Sandton, they became very lonely. The isolation led them into depression. And the depression changed their lifestyle, because all of a sudden they could no longer worship. They could no longer do the way of greetings, of hugging each other in a worship service, which then built the stress. On the other hand of Alex was the anger, which they flip depression into anger as a way of survival so that they may be able to do something. Now, when you look at the two worlds, you realize that human beings are creatures of control. They would like to control issues, they would like to manipulate, but the outcome is differently in terms of depression, isolation, and in terms of anger. And so what they did was, in Alex, they then began to move into the state in which they denied that there was COVID. And on the other side, they were now stressed that they could not visit, they could not go into the restaurants and others. So these kind of two stresses were so difficult for the clergy people. The difficulty came in terms of the burial, where you dictated that within an hour you would. The cultural norms of the lifestyle in an African village of Alex was that the coffin could not come back home. On the other side, you're having people who would say, we will cremate and all. And then 1 hour service was not much. The 50 people in there brought extreme anger on the other side, because people who were known were not able to come and close the life chapter. Then we move into bargaining. It is either you fight or you fly away. And these two brought threat into the two community. And once people are threat and are in a threat situation, they can do any other thing in order to survive in there. So both are clothed by anger. They're clothed by anger. And at the end was the army coming in, the SAP coming in, and they then began to realize that there were no enemies in terms of that. Non-church, they spiritually were dry. They could not come to the Lord. And they began asking, where is God in such a situation? And that's the two words. Thank you. Thank you, Jana.
Thank you very much, Maake. I heard something about just hearing from your context and Kas's question. I think it was the second one. He was saying about walking around in someone else's shoes and asking why are they angry. Just something of that coming through. So thanks for that.
Welcome.
Thank you. Our next panelist is James Kirkpatrick. Now James studeer by RAI, tans bekend as die Universiteit van Johannesburg en die Universiteit van Pretoria. Hy is predikant sedert 1981 in 3 gemeentes. Hy is die laaste 31 jaar in Stellastraat in Pretoria. James is getroud en hy het 2 seuns en 5 kleindogters. En hy is op verskillende terreine in die NG Kerk betrokke. Tans assessor van die Noordelike Sinode en lid van die dagbestuur van die Algemene Sinode Moderamen. Hy promoveer in Ou Testament, eskatologie by profetiese literatuur en die laaste 20 jaar fokus hy op hermeneutiek. Dankie, James.
Thank you, Jana. Up till now, we had the privilege to be addressed by Van Walt and Wepener and Masango in eloquent English in a meaningful way. I think it's time for a bit of language diversity, and I'm going to address you in Afrikaans. Being Kirkpatrick, it sounds a little bit strange, isn't it?
Yeah, it is.
Yeah, I'm of mixed origin. My mother is Afrikaans speaking
person. Yes.
and my father was a American, so
Yeah.
Afrikaans is my mother tongue, and I prefer to address Afrikaans.
Die Here verstaan dit.
Dankie professor. Om my gedagtes te struktureer en te probeer binne jou tyd te hou, Jana, het ek 'n PowerPoint presentasie voorberei en ek gaan hom nou share en jy druk daai stophorlosie van jou wanneer ek begin, né? Goed, vriende, ek gaan fokus op die subtitel, A Faithful Response to Disillusionment, 'n gelowige reaksie ontnugtering. Ek wil begin met 'n aanhaling van Breitenbach. Alle praat in hierdie treurige, bitter, bond, begrafnisland is politiek. Of dit nou fluisterpraat, katpraat, wind of spoeg of saampraat is. Dis politiek. Politiek as die ding wat ons lewe beheers, die beginsels waar volgens 'n staat geregeer word, waar mense se lewe gestruktureer word. Ons praat dis politiek vandag. Die vraag wat ek myself moes afvra, mag ek saampraat? Ek, 'n gelowige, party sal sê net, maar daarom tog, wit, Afrikaanse man, ouer as 60, met skuld oor apartheid, 'n na-apartheidsdroom gehad. I had a dream. Note the tense of that sentence. Ons het gesê, ons gaan elkeen uit ons eie persoonlike perspektief praat, om juist weg te kom van die idee dat jy namens ander mense kan praat. Jy kan nie namens ander mense kwaad wees nie. En daarom, as ek luister na die klein wêreldjie waarin ek leef en werk, hier in die ooste van Pretoria, dan hoor ek drie stemme van ontnugtering. Die eerste een klink so, ek het jou mos gesê, dis hierdie triomfantelike lament van rasisme. Can't govern. I've told you so. Aaklige stem om te hoor, maar ek hoor hom. Die tweede stem is klink vromer en is in sommige gevalle wel opreg, maar meestal 'n bietjie van 'n verskuilde argument. En dit is wanneer dit so gaan, as mense sê, ek is so ontnugter, jy weet, want dit is die armes wat die swaarste kry. Dit is die armste van armes wat nou ly onder die gemors wat in die land aan die gang is. Ek noem dit die skynheilige vroomheid van die morele hoë grond wat neerbuig na arme mense toe. Shame, sies tog. Ook dit 'n reaksie wat ek nie dink sou kon kwalifiseer vir ons titel van 'n gelowige reaksie op die krisis nie. Die derde een waarmee ek 'n bietjie meer wil identifiseer, is om te sê, ons droom is in sy moer. Nou, begryp jy dat waarom ek hierdie kort inset in Afrikaans doen, want jy kan eintlik net in jou moedertaal so praat. Om oor die wat jy gehad het te sê, die is nou in sy moer. Dis 'n kollektiewe teleurstelling oor 'n mislukte stelsel. I want to cry, the beloved country. Cry, the beloved country. En daarom het ek as predikant van 'n gemeente, so 'n paar weke terug, vir die eerste keer in 40 jaar wat ek predikant is, dit gewaag om oor een van die woedepsalms in die psalmbundel te preek, die sogenaamde imprecatory psalms. Want hermeneuties is dit uiters komplekse saak om oor daardie woede en die taal, daardie potent words in Psalm 58, dit is geweldig riskant om dit te waag om daaroor te praat. Dit is eties 'n mynveld, want kan 'n mens na Jesus, kan 'n mens vanuit die Jesus verhaal nog hierdie taal van Psalm 58 gebruik? En ek dink wel ja. Ek het net gister 'n lang gesprek met my vriend professor Dirk Human van IP gehad oor wat nou kenner van die psalms is. En hy het my maar weer 'n keer net gesê dis riskant, 'n mens kan nie sommer dit so doen nie, maar uiteindelik het hy toegegee dat ek dit tog maar wel mag doen. En ek wil sê hoekom ek dink as predikant van 'n gemeente wie se droom en sy moeren is, wil ek uit 'n woede psalm uitpreek. En daar's 3 redes. Pastoraal gee dit vir my die geleentheid om te identifiseer met die ontnugtering en woede van mense. Ek neem mense ernstig wanneer ek vanuit een van hierdie woede psalms uitpreek. Tweedens, om ook hierdie mense aan te moedig om te baklei. Ek sê dit in aanhalingstekens want ek hou nie baie van hierdie soort van aggressiewe taal nie, maar dis die taal wat in daai psalm voorkom, om aan te hou om te baklei teen ongeregtigheid. En dan derdens, deur die proses van reïnterpretasie, en dit is belangrik hermeneuties, om hierdie woede teks te vat, om te herinterpreteer vir die eie konteks, en om dan konstruktief en opbouend te werk aan die herstel van die samelewing, dat hierdie woede gekanaliseer word na dade van geregtigheid. En daarom sou ek wou sê, al sê ek, my na-apartheidsdroom is in sy moeren, en al is ek self op die moeren, dan wil ek steeds sê, hierdie psalm energeer my om aan te hou werk en aan te hou droom van 'n land waarin daar groter geregtigheid is. Dankie, Jana.
Baie dankie, James. Dit gaan goed wees om na die vrae ook te kyk. Dit klink vir my jy en Kas het ook redelik baie om vir mekaar te sê. So ja, dankie daarvoor. Our next panelist is Marlene Marcotto. Marlene is a part-time minister at URC Eerste Rivier Suid. She is also a program manager at the EFSA Institute. Her PhD research focused on lament in liturgy. Marlene, South Africa, but also the world, is experiencing challenging times. Could the practice of lament in liturgy perhaps provide a tool for people to work through the turmoil that they are currently experiencing? Thanks, Marlene.
Dankie, Jana. The practice of lament in liturgy is perhaps, in my opinion, one of our religious and liturgical traditions that are not used enough in our faith communities. The practice of lament itself should really play a more explicit role in our churches. I think we will all agree that 2020 has been a challenging year for all of us. Each one feeling an overwhelming sense of loss, some more than other. And when I look in my own ministry, I see how people are suffering. And we are not able to comfort people the way that we really want to comfort them. And in most cases, for us, comforting people means that we are there with them physically. So when I listen to my faith community, the different stories that they share with me, then it becomes obvious people are angry, people are disappointed, and many have even lost hope. And now when we look at what happened in our churches, even before lockdown, we found that people tend to be very uncomfortable to share their deepest feelings with each other. And you will find in most cases, it is easier for people to say or to share with others how good God is. You will hear when you greet people, then they will say God is good all the time, and all the time God is good. People share more easily also in smaller groups, but even so, people still find it difficult to become vulnerable before others, to question God. And so we are not honest about our feelings. We are scared to go through a process of discomfort. And really, if you want to experience genuine lament, there must be a relationship of trust and intimacy and love in that community within which you lament. Now, to go through a process of lament in our liturgy could be quite challenging for us. When we develop that liturgy, we need to make sure that what we are proposing, it actually expresses the meaning of the event. As I said, when we lament, you become vulnerable before God and your fellow congregants. It's an emotional affair. It's a messy affair. Walter Brueggemann asks such a relevant question in his book, From Earth to Joy, From Death to Life, where he asks, are we so polite and grateful that we forgot to be honest? So when you lament, it is a way of you trying to deal with unthinkable things that are happening in your life. It is a time that you can be vocal about your pain and your suffering. But the fact that you lament about an issue, the fact that you are able to verbalize that pain, does not guarantee you that that issue will be resolved. But it provides you with a safe space in which you can actually verbalize that pain. So if we can take an example, for instance, if you were to develop a lament liturgy for people who have been abused, you will have to make sure that you have safety mechanisms in place for when they will need the emotional support during that process of lament. It is a process that you cannot rush. And there are two sides to it. You need to give people the time to sit in their discomfort, but you also need to guide people to find a way in which they can combine their joy and their pain. And through our liturgy, through our sharing, it doesn't matter who we are. We share because we have created a time and a space where we can create or where we can share our deepest feelings. So when we make our liturgies, we can tell our stories, we can paint our pictures, we can make music, we can sing our songs, we can dance, we can discover our creativity. And if we are unsure of how to express this during lament in liturgy, we can actually take our cue from the biblical Psalms and use the structure that we find in some of them. We have an example of Psalm 51, where you have a crisis of guilt. You have Psalm 88, where you have the times of utter despair. And perhaps Psalm 77, where you have affliction of old age. And those are just 3 Psalms that I've mentioned. You can even change the Psalm to speak directly into the specific situation that you are dealing with. So yes, I do believe that lament in liturgy could provide a tool for people to work through their pain and suffering that they are experiencing. It may not solve the situation, but it will provide them with a safe space to verbalize that emotional distress that we are going through. And it can also perhaps kickstart the process of healing and hope as well. I think I will leave it there for now, Jana. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Marlene. I think you've also helped me maybe to hear what James said. There was something about him being really honest in a space where perhaps he could trust and love in terms of his congregation. Yeah, so thank you for that. Next up is Ivor Swartz. Now, Ivor is a minister to the youth at NG Oosterlig in Pretoria. since the beginning of this year, and he serves on the hashtag Imagine Planning team. He's just brought out his first book, Die Verlore Seun van die Gaaitjie, 2 weeks ago. Congratulations, Ivor. That's very exciting. We look forward to listening to you.
Die koue kloue van my swaar kry bring my weer tot voor die spieël. Ek sien my hart se ingedrup swart, die haat kruip op tot in my keel. Al die straktes op die vlaktes hou my mense weg van kos. Hier aan my kant van die highway is die duiwel al weer los. Ek sit by die tafel van ongenooides met my stywe pap en lag. Die rook trek van die plastiek wat in my huis brand in die nag. My ouer broer het een hand met 'n Shoprite-sak gevat. Hy het die plastiek uit die vel van my jonge broer se bobeen uitgebrand. Deur my trane en dagawalms het ek na God toe uitgeroep, maar hy was besig in die suburbs met 'n Bybelstudiegroep. My moeder was 'n enkel, maar haar enigste krag was bid. Toe ek vir 5 jaar van my lewe in die tronk en bende sit, slaan sy haar oop na die berge, maar hulp kom van ryk mense. Hulle sit almal in hulle glashuise en gooi klippe oor die grense. Dis hoekom ek so sukkel om te glo dat God voorsien, want ek hoor dit met my mense wat my met hul privilege wil bedien, wat kospakkies kom uitdeel om weer foto's te share op Facebook. Ek wens hulle steek die highway oor om die lewe te kan sien uit my hoek. Maar die Messias kompleks dryf my baie teen die mure uit. Die ander dag moes ek weer stry met Jesus en my trane wegbyt. Hy kom visit in die gaatjie, maar vra my hoekom is ek spyt. I guess ek's moeg vir al sy handouts en sy selfies op 'n uitreik. Maar wie's my maar genadig, Here, is net U wat harte ken. Ek smaak nie meer beklei nie, ek gebruik net maar my stem. Om dinge te kan change, ruil ek my swart in vir 'n pen. Miskien leer ons hoe lyk liefde as dit regtig sou wen. Gister was my 36ste verjaarsdag en Martin Luther King was so onder 2 jaar jonger as ek toe hy in 1963 geskryf het in sy letters from a Birmingham jail. But I say, first I must confess that over the last few years, I have been gravely disappointed with the white moderate. I have almost reached the regrettable conclusion that the Negro's great stumbling block in the stride towards freedom is not the white citizens' councillor or the Ku Klux Klaner, but the white moderate who is more devoted to order than to justice, who prefers a negative peace, which is the absence of tension, to a positive peace, which is the presence of justice, who constantly says, I agree with you in the goal you seek, but I can't agree with your methods of direct action, who paternalistically feels he can set the timetable for another man's freedom, who lives by the myth of time and who can constantly advises the Negro to wait until a more convenient season. 5 jaar later, as Martin Luther King doodgeskiet. Dit wat vir my voorkom of haat meer draaglik, meer tolerant is as regverdige woede. Ons ken vir Prof. Johan Heinz lees ek het in 1982 begin sterk teen die kerk en haar ondersteuning van apartheid praat en in 1994 is hy ook koelbloedig doodgeskiet. Weereens lyk dit of haat die oorhand gekry het teen iemand se regverdige woede. Onlangs het ek die dokumentêr oor Prof. Heinz se lewe, Exorcist of Apartheid, op Facebook geplaas met 'n paar gedagtes van my eie. En dit het 'n hele paar mense ongemaklik laat voel oor waar ek staan. Dit het mense laat voel ek is aggressief, maar eintlik is hulle net nie gemaklik met passie nie. Steeds in 'n tyd van tolerance en demokrasie mag jy nie kwaad raak oor onreg nie, tensy die onreg aan 'n sekere demografie aangedoen is, tensy jy oor die korrupsie en die armoede en die onbevoegde regering praat, dan mag jy asseblief met alle mag woedend kwaad raak. Spoel jou mond uit op social media all you want, want daai is aanvaarbaar. Waar ek vandaan kom, het ons 'n beskrywing vir kwaad raak. En ek dink dit is een van die beste beskrywings ooit. As wanneer jy sê, as iemand jou kwaad maak, sê dit, jy maak my bors warm. Want ons almal kry daai gevoel in ons binneste wanneer ons kwaad raak, iemand maak ons bors warm. Jy lees 'n artikel op Marula Media en iets in jou binneste begin brand. Jy sien hoe Steve, meneer Black Lives Matter adres in Afrikaans en jou bors raak warm. Ek dink almal in Suid-Afrika op die oomblik is bors warm. En daai is die probleem, ons kan bors warm raak all we want. Maar dis wanneer ons bors warm raak en niks daaraan doen nie. Dis wanneer ons bors warm raak en net ander mense ook laat bors warm raak vir dieselfde goed wat vir ons bors warm raak. En dan gaan daai mense in die traffic in en hulle gaan in die werk in en hulle gaan in die kerk in en hulle bors bly warm en niemand doen iets daaraan nie. Vir te veel mense is borswarm raak net die begin van haat en hulle kan niks aan daai doen nie. Ek is kwaad want vandat ek kan onthou toe ek as kind besef het my pa kom nooit by huis toe, hy het dood versmoor op 'n appelplaas toe hy en 'n vriend 'n vuur gemaak het in die kamer waar hulle gebly het in 1987. My ma het 'n sent vergoeding ontvang. Ek is kwaad toe ek 11 jaar oud was in 1995 en aan 'n man se Harley Davidson gevat het en hy vir my sê hy versmoor nou in jou eie bloedkaffer. Ek was 11 jaar oud en ek is 'n kleerling. Ek is kwaad omdat mense dink my Facebook post is rassisties, maar daai dieselfde mense het in die hoogte van apartheid groot geword het en nou nog nie 'n woord daaroor gesê het nie, is kwaad en is ongemaklik omdat ek kwaad en passievol is. Ek is kwaad omdat mense te vinnig na oplossings wil gryp omdat hulle ongemaklik is om mense in die oë te kyk en te sê vertel my jou lived experience en ek gaan probeer diep luister. Ek is kwaad omdat dit net by Rudy Swanepoel Bouwerbos en my vrou is, wat al 3 wit mense is waar ek kan my kwaad uiter en wegstap met idees oor hoe om vorentoe te beweeg en 'n wesenlike verskil te probeer maak. Ek lees in Jakobus 1:19 waar hy in die boodskapvertaling van Prof Stefan Jobet hy sê liewe mede-Christene, plak hierdie woorde op waar julle dit elke dag kan sien. Julle moet ander mense 'n kans gee om te sê wat op hulle hart het. Luister rustig na hulle sonne om hulle te wil doodpraat. As asof Jakobus sê, los jou toondoofheid eers by die huis en luister diep na mense. Diep luister is 'n practice wat ons nie aan gewoond is nie. Die praktyk van diep luister, ek het my eie definisie van dit geskryf, waar ek sê, die praktyk van diep luister beteken, dit maak nie saak hoe duidelik of onduidelik die storieverteller is, ek sal die stellings en aannames maak, voordat ek nie genoeg tyd laat beweeg het, tussen wat hulle sê en wat ek dink ek het gehoor nie. Die maklikste ding in ons toondoof wêreld is om mense se regverdige enge af te maak, as aggressief, as te veel, as te erg, en so stook ons net haat en ons kom nie by die regte verskil maak uit nie. Grace and peace vir julle almal.
Sjoe, Ivor, dankie vir dit. Ek het 'n klomp gedagtes. Dankie vir jou rou eerlikheid. Dankie, ja, net die manier hoe jy dit deurgegee het. Ek dink dit is Lament wat ons nou gehoor het. Iets oor die borswarm raak van die land. Ek dink dis ook waarvan Etienne gepraat het aan die begin. Iets daarvan dat dit 'n kollektiewe gevoel ook nou is, maar ook 'n persoonlike gevoel. Elkeen is in 'n lyk ons nou heeltemal anders. En dan ook Marlene wat gepraat het oor dat ons vergeet het om eerlik te wees, dat ons amper polite en grateful moet wees. So dankie dat jy dit net gesê het soos dit is. Ja. Vriende, ons volgende paneellid is Michelle Boonzaaier. So Michelle is an ordained minister in the Dutch Reformed Church in Brackenfell. In her full-time job at Inclusive and Affirming Ministries, IAM, she forms part of the management team. At IAM, she's involved in workshops on human sexuality and diversity training, dialogue training, integrating sexuality and spirituality, and contextual Bible studies. Her husband of 21 years, Ivor, calls her a Rev activist, both a reverend and an activist. Thank you, Michelle.
Good evening, everyone. I thank you for joining me in my anger, because I am angry. And the only way that I can be angry is in the presence of the justice scandal. So I brought my justice scandal into our space. I don't know where to start with my anger. And Ivor, when you speak, I'm crying because you spoke. I wasn't crying before that. Because my anger intersects on so many levels. And I sort of put aside my written piece. So Jana, please note my time. I was 4 years old when a grown man decided that my body, created by God, intimately woven in my mother's womb, would become a space where his penis would penetrate or try to penetrate my 4-year-old vagina. And you know, the first time I spoke about it in a faith space, I was told to, Michelle, just be still and know. And I thought, I didn't swear at that time, maar nou dink ek my goeie volk. Be still and know. Be still and know what? And I grew up later on, and the silence of the be still, the way Psalm 46 verse 10 was interpreted, was a way to silence me as a woman who had experienced a violent violation. And my anger was not so much because I was silenced, but it was because this was a man of God who had violated me. For long, the anger that I felt, and I love the way Etienne put it, it became something that I was not thriving. So it sort of led to depression. And I was always fascinated by Psalm 139, always fascinated. And you know that only, so today I want to talk about the silence of anger. That anger around certain bodies are okay, but I was always told to be silent because my body actually didn't matter as much as this man of God's body. So this was why I was told to be silent, because this man of God, I would ruin his life if I had spoken out. This was in my teens. So I, 4-year-old Michelle, growing up, would ruin this man's life if I had spoken out. And then, you know, I become a minister of religion, and the first time that I have to preach on Psalm 139, do you know what? The following verses are skipped over. How I wish that you would kill all cruel and heartless people and protect me from them. They are always rebelling and speaking evil of you. You know, I hate anyone who hates you, Lord, and refuses to obey. They are my enemies too, and I truly hate them. And if someone had joined me then in my hatred of God's enemies, it would have been the most pastoral thing to do for me. And something about that text, when I finally realized, oh my word, this text is in the Bible, I may hate this man of God that violated my body, whose penis violated my vagina. I want to say those words again and again. And then only when I was able to voice the anger, and this was the gift to me, my gift was the fact that this text, my love text, when I didn't know as a teenager that these words form part of the text. Because within the lectionary text, when the lectionary is read, those 4 verses are not read. So we read the lectionary from verse 1 to 18, and then we read verse 23 and 24. Oh, search me, oh God. So we are silencing our faith communities. We're telling them, shut up about your anger because we're excluded from our lectionary. And not only is this what text excluded from our lectionary, there are so many other angry texts that are excluded from our lectionary. So I love the fact that Etienne says that for me to get out of my depression, I have to voice my anger. I have to be able to say, I'm angry that a man of God violated my vagina with his penis, and it's not okay. I only started preaching about this from the pulpit 2 years ago. 2 years ago. I'm a 47-year-old woman. So I only started angry preaching, joining lesbians who are maimed in our country and killed and violated, gay men who are beaten up, women who are violated. I, as a minister of religion who experienced violence in my body, was only able to talk about it because the text didn't help me. The liturgical spaces didn't help me. And for me, I think my life's work is to preach people into voice. Because that's the thing that I needed. I needed this justice candle within the liturgical space and not to be told, be still and know. And I think I agree that our country is in trouble. But I think it's in trouble because we are silent about too many things. And within the Dutch Reformed Church space, we speak, I don't think we speak nuanced enough about our silences. I don't think we are, I think we have too many, what do we call it in Afrikaans, blinde kolle. So we talk about certain violence and certain violations and certain angers, and we don't talk about other angers. And this is, as I was saying, I'm a 47-year-old woman now. So this is 43 years on, and I still find spaces where my anger is, makes people so uncomfortable, makes them so uncomfortable that it's impossible to join me. So I thank everyone. I see many faces on the screen, some that I know, some that I don't know, that I am able to find a space to say, I am extremely angry, that certain bodies matter more than others, and that we exclude texts from the Bible, and we pretend that they're not there. And it's necessary that we have to start including those texts in our lectionaries, and including, and help people to find words to say, I am extremely angry. Yeah. Oh goodness, I spoke for 8.5 minutes.
Thank you, Michelle. Don't worry, I'm on the time, so it's really fine. I want to thank you for considering this a space where you could share your story with us, and also I think that's the challenge, and maybe that's what's going to come out in the discussions and the questions is, how can we be less nuanced about the silence, and how can liturgical spaces help with that? Yeah. So thank you for your honesty, and just one of the things we said is that we sit in the discomfort of honesty. So thank you. We now have laat ek 'n bietjie Afrikaans praat. Ons het nou geleentheid om vrae te vra. So ons wil graag hoor wat se vrae daar uit die gehoor uit is vir die paneellede. Ja. Ek sien Marnus het nou gevra vir die paneellede om te vra. Ek kyk gou ook by die chatbox.
Jana, kan ek miskien iets sê terwyl ons wag vir 'n vraag?
Asseblief, Etienne.
Thank you. I'm not used to be on these panels where, and it's incredibly refreshing. Ek wil sommer Afrikaans sê baie dankie is ongelooflik om deel te wees hiervan en te luister na allemaal persoonlike ervarings. Dit raak mens baie diep. Visceraal is die woord seker wat ek sou gebruik, want dis 'n term wat vir my iets sê wat meer is as wat 'n mens net in woorde kan uitspreek. Dis viscerale ervaring. And maybe if I could just add something which we've learned from the science to in a sense provide the weight, the appropriateness of the weight of what I've heard, almost like there's a refrain here that deurtrek of this idea of injustice. We've seen that, and this comes as no surprise to you. If you think about the term thriving, putting you into a baseline relaxed physiological state, enabling you to survive for as long as you have to live throughout your life. Let me put it this way. If we don't thrive in life, we have chronic stress. You basically die after a relatively short and unpleasant life. Now, we're not meant to live this way. I'm not a preacher, but God didn't intend us to live that way, right? So the idea that we need to thrive, have a thriving life, means that we live through the life phases and have a longevity, which is related to our genetic program, if you may. And to enable us to do that, we need safety. Thriving is described by Gallup Foundation as a number of safeties, right? It's physical safety, it's social safety, it is financial safety. It is a number of different dimensional securities. If we don't have that sense of security, we move out of the thriving space. And if we can't overcome it, we go into chronic stress and eventually we implode. And anger, of course, is a result of this process. Now, having said that, I just want to add to that point, social safety is something we've been studying quite extensively. Social safety consists of bonding and belonging. And bonding is way, way more important than belonging, but it's only because it's more foundational to the core of enabling that we stick together as family units, as spouses, as people who entrust ourselves to each other. Bonding is driven by something called oxytocin, which is secreted in the brain in a very different place. It's not the same as belonging. So I need to have bonding, and I need to have a sense of belonging. And bonding is entrustment. It means that I give everything that I have to someone, and that someone gives everything that that person has to me. My mother is one example, as a baby and a child. Spouses. This is why people need to stick, when they stick together and they truly bond, they entrust themselves to one another. I give everything, and you must give everything. That's fair. If it's not that, it's unfair. It's not. There's no justice. Belonging, on the other hand, is culture. It's a sense of having bigger tribes who effectively, and that's driven by a whole different process in the brain called dopamine. It's a whole different system that looks after what is fair. As effectively, if you are belonging, you have a sense of belonging, a right to belong in your head, in your mind. When there's, once again, a fair exchange between everybody who belong in that tribe. It's going to be fair. So a fair exchange lies at the core of a sense of belonging. If there's no fair exchange, if there's injustice and a sense that we are not being fair to one another as human beings or within a tribe, within a culture, within a subculture, etc., within a nation, the result is a lack of social safety. And we know today that the lack of social safety is at the core. It's one of the major derailers of resilience and derailers of the system, which leads to chronic stress and implosion. I thought I just want to share that with you, having heard this as a thread throughout the conversation. Thanks for the opportunity, Jana.
Thank you, Etienne. I wonder if one of the panelists would like to respond. It really does help to hear the biological side of things. Yeah. Okay, then we're going to move on. We've got some questions that have come through. Gus, it's a question to you. What did you mean by angry listening?
Okay, what did I mean by angry listening?
Yes.
I meant that with regard to angry liturgies and angry sermons, by default, we mean that we're going to give expression to, say, a very harsh lament psalm, or, for example, what James referred to. What I meant was that even more difficult than that, that is extremely important. But the flip side of the coin is, if we want to express the anger, we must also be able to open up ourselves. It's a kind of a spirituality almost that you need to be able to receive the anger. That's angry listening. Can you, in this webinar, remain here whilst Michelle is speaking? And I think that's something that we often in our liturgical spaces not good with. Michelle just showed us and talked about it, that we don't have those spaces. I think it's so important. If I can quickly add what Michelle said the other night in a webinar, Walter Bredeman said sometimes our lectionaries are actually, he feels they're imperialists, as they're excluding some of the most crucial and the most cruel and the horror texts, and he wants us to include them. So I personally think, now I'm moving on to a next question that I saw there, sorry Jana, is somebody asked, what can we do? I think Peter Tief asked that. I think we must attempt to make our liturgical spaces and our sermons in a loving way, rougher, harder, tougher. And it's a difficult thing to do, but one thing is what Michelle said, is to include certain texts and not overlook them. That's a first step. So that's from my side.
Thank you, Chris. Yes, please, Michelle.
I think that the first time that I could really speak from an angry place, from the pulpit, the first time I spoke, I started on the pulpit and then I walked down from the pulpit, because I realized that the pulpit is such a space of power that I need to deconstruct the power. So I moved from the pulpit and preached from the communion table. The first time I spoke my story about sexual violence, this is what I had to do. I couldn't speak from the pulpit because the pulpit was for me a violent space. It wasn't a space where I could speak from. So I started my liturgy on the pulpit, and then I said, well, now I need to say something from the communion table, because the communion table is the only space that I can actually speak my story from, because it is my broken space. So I think part of preaching as an angry preacher is that I had to make sense of my own body within the Dutch Reformed space, because the space was also a white space. It was a predominantly male space. The pulpit for me became an abusive space when I was a child. So I think we as clergy have to understand our power. We have to understand that when we preach from the pulpit, we need to speak to our own vulnerability. And our vulnerability, my vulnerability as a minister, lies in my power and how I use that power on the pulpit. So when I join people as an angry preacher, as a minister of religion, I have to be very honest about the way power and anger and all of that intersect. Because in some VGK gemeentes, the minister is the richest person in the gemeente. The minister is the only one living op die bult, you know, where the white people live. So I have to deal with my own vulnerabilities, and I have to deal with my class and the fact that I could sit on a therapist's couch and work through all my anger and all my violation and all of that. And the women that I pastored to don't have that luxury. So I think within the South African context, we have to speak to the intersections that Ivor so beautifully spoke about. And when we bring the text, you're right, Cass, we come with an imperialist view to the text. I had to deconstruct my own imperialist view before I could really preach from a place of anger in love to white people.
Thank you, Michelle. Would one of the panelists want to respond?
Jana, if I may.
Please.
I see Frederik. I don't want to specifically respond on what the previous speakers have said, but I see that Frederik has posted saying that it seems that we struggle to imagine our liturgical space as spaces of safety to receive anger. And I think I actually want to latch on to what Michelle said about, she specifically now spoke about the pulpit, that power symbol. But I think that could possibly be one of the challenges that we have been through the years. Our liturgical space in church has been so prim and proper, and especially now that I'm a wife and I'm a mother, I can see it more clearly. In our liturgical space in church, children are not allowed. Children are zhushed to one side because they're making a noise. If you in church, and a lot of churches do not have the luxury of having a separate a baby room where mothers can be comfortable with a noisy toddler or maybe even a child that got sick while they're at church, and children are silenced. And for me in my ministry, and maybe this is not anger, but it's just the way that we operate in church, I constantly tell my congregants, I say, people, we are here together as a family of God. We need to listen to our children. And if they are noisy, maybe they want to say something, I engage with it. And so we really need to start to reimagine our liturgical spaces. And we, as ministers, I'm of the opinion we cannot do it alone. You need a team around you. We cannot be so arrogant to think that we can develop and create all of that and make it perfect if you want. We need a team. We've got many capable people in our churches. We need a team around us that we can walk together with them to see how we can deconstruct, this myth that we have surrounding our liturgical spaces. Thank you, Jana.
Thanks, Marlene. James, there was a question, daar was 'n vraag vir jou. Hoe reageer mens op daardie eerste twee reaksies? So ek neem aan dis die I told you so en die armes kry swaar.
Ja, ek sou onmiddellik sê, dit is waar integriteit na vore kom. Dit is nie goed wat ons net maar kan aanhoor en maak of dit okay is nie. Dis not okay. Dis goed wat eerlik geopponeer moet word. So ek dink dit is 'n dominee se rol om in 'n sekere sin sy gemeente kwaad te maak oor ongeregtigheid. Want as jy dit nie daagliks aan die lyf voel nie, dan kan jy dink dat jou klein wêreldjie is nou maar die wêreld. So dit bly die profetiese verantwoordelikheid om hierdie woede tekste te gebruik en vir mense te sê, verstaan jy wat met vroue in hierdie land gebeur? Verstaan jy iets daarvan? Al is dit nie deel van jou klein wêreldjie nie, moet jy daarvan kennis neem, moet jy daar in opstand kom teen, en daarvoor is daai woede psalms vir my geskik om dit te doen. Maar daai eerste twee reaksies, jy kan dit nie napraat nie, jy kan dit eintlik nie eers verstaan nie, jy moet dit opponeer, jy moet dit met alles wat jy in jou het, met die evangelie tegemoet tree.
Dankie, James. Dalk net 'n laaste vraag, dan gaan ons moet begin afsluit. Ivor, die rol van kunste of digkuns in protes, en hoe mens uiting gee aan woede, hoe dink jy daaroor?
Ja, ek dink dis waar ek vir myself probeer 'n spasie in krap, omdat ek baie luister na hoe gepas die songs van Fokol Polisiekar van daai tyd, hoe dit vir 'n hele generasie amper taal gegee het oor die frustrasie en die woede waarmee hulle gesit het oor die die ontnugtering waardeur hulle gegaan het en hoe ek nou nog deur daai songs werk. Soos byvoorbeeld die een wat ek vanoggend geluister het tussen die krake waar hulle sê in ons verbrokkelende fondasie is daar nou lewe in krake wat daar eers niks was nie. En dit is so. Ons weet ons sit met baie woede, ons sit met baie krake in ons stelsel, plekke is daar die rots al uitgebars en die krake is net te groot, maar daar is plekke waar daar lewe is. En so 'n mens kan baie die kunste afmaak as hulle net 'n klein plekkie daar so in die hoek. Maar dit kan ook baie keer gebeur dat die kerk se profetiese stem meer van 'n clinging symbol is en die kunste, die digters, die musikante, soos wat Bob Dylan gebruik in sy song van The Times They Are Changing, is dit 'n profetiese lied wat 1963 of 68 geskryf is, wat nou nog sy waarde het en soveel diepte het. En so ek dink is belangrik dat ons gaan draw na, soos Neil Young het ook 2 weke terug weer 'n nuwe song uitgebring, ook 'n heavy polities gedrewe song oor wat hy sien en beleef in die samelewing. So ons moet soms gaan kyk na wat sê die kunstenaars, wat sê die digters, en hulle kyk met 'n ander kritiese oog na die wêreld as wat ons as gelowiges kyk soms.
Dankie, Ivor. Julle, ons gaan moet begin afsluit. Maake, yes.
Yeah. Thank you. I just want to pick up the children's issue. The children are silenced. I live in the two worlds like a schizophrenic, because the other world allows the children in the church, allows them to make shouts, allow them to do anything. The world in Sandton have what is called children's church. They should not disturb the elderly, and occasionally we allow them to come and see what we do. And those two worlds are very, very, it makes me angry. Once you speak to the children, they ask them they must go to their church, as if our church is clean and their church is dirty. These are some of the things we need to look at very seriously. And then when they are gone at youth, we get surprised that we want them to come into this big church that is very savors, clean, and they say, no, it doesn't belong to us. It belongs to elderly people. I think Malang Nel has a lot of work to do. Heaven may be his home, but he must not be in a hurry to go until he fixes up this family to be together.
Thank you, Maake. I hope he's listening. Friends, I would like to, in closing, maybe hear from each of you in 30 seconds, because that's about all we've got. What have you learned through this discussion today? Just something you want the audience to take home, a new perspective perhaps. So I'm gonna, maybe in the same order that we started. Etienne, would you like to go first then? Etienne, we can't hear you.
You got me now. So I think in 30 seconds, what I would say that really struck me is that for me, the thread is once again the injustice of the same old in South Africa. We've got the same old, but at least I believe it's not the same old conversation. There's something fresh that's coming with power. There's I think a swell that's arising, and we need to move with that tide. And I believe there's a tipping point where things are really going to shift for more justice. It will reduce and increase our social safety, reduce that lack of belonging. And I believe that is something that I really look forward to. I'm glad for that COVID is showing that to us in an ugly face. But I just believe that was a way of just showing the old, which is now going to become new and fresh.
Thank you very much, Etienne. Kas.
Jana, ek dink ten diepste gaan die hele gesprek oor dat ons hoop soek en hoop nodig het en smag daarna. En ek hoor in hierdie gesprek dat woede wat stil gemaak word kan oorgaan in wanhoop, maar woede wat op 'n sinvolle manier 'n stem kan kry, is woede wat die potensiaal het om vir ons hoop te gee. En ons land het dit nodig, so ek wil vir julle dankie sê dat ons hieroor kan praat. Dankie.
Dankie, Kas. Maake.
I must thank Michelle for having opened the blast. This is a month of women. It is a month in which I started preaching on Bathsheba and Tamar. And we normally say Bathsheba is fornication, is not, but it is a matter of rape misused by power. And we as male chocolate brown find it very difficult to preach about this because it's taboo. We don't speak sex and all. Thank you for opening up this. We have to confront the issue of violence and abuse of women and children, especially women in the Bible who do not have a name. We must name them.
Thank you very much, Maake. Thank you. James?
Jana, die stemme wat ek hier gehoor het my nog meer oortuig dat ons nie kan stil bly nie en dat die ontsteltenis en die woede oor ongeregtigheid wat ons in die Bybeltekste vind, ons kan help en kan dra om nie stil te bly.
Dankie, James. Marlene?
Dankie, Jana. Ek wil net sê, Michelle, a big virtual hug, my sister. Ek preek Sondag oor a text of terror, the rape of Tamar. En ja, I'm trembling in my boots. I think for me, this session just basically underlined we need to move out of our comfort zones. We do not have a choice in this. And the honesty within the discomfort that we are experiencing, it's not negotiable. We have to go through that process. And also, if I can come back to Lament, and it latches on to what Kas just said, that we cannot see Lament as a process of in isolation. It's always good to look at it in conjunction with the process of healing and hope, because that is ultimately at the end what we, I would say, what we need. We need to be healed and reconciled as a people at the end of the day. Thank you, Jana.
Thank you, Marlene. Ivor.
For me, it's two things. It's that what I took from this is that no group holds the monopoly on anger. We're all allowed to be angry, and then the second thing is we must own our own anger. We cannot judge other people on the things that they are angry about. We can judge the expression and how they give expression to their anger, but we can own our anger, but no one holds the monopoly on anger in the country.
Thank you, Ivor. Michelle.
Oh, Ivor, you said it so beautifully. My learning is actually a prayer. I really, really pray that the intersections of our anger may become our point of creativity. I believe that anger can either destroy or it can become something so beautiful and so creative. And I look forward to watching this space. Thank you.
Thank you, Michelle. Ek wil graag net die geleentheid neem om vir die paneellede te bedank vir julle deelname en insette in vandag se gesprek. It's been really valuable and we really appreciate your participation. Also to our audience, dankie dat julle saam gesels het. We trust that it's been a rewarding conversation and that it's given us all some food for thought. Voordat ons almal groet, sal ek graag vir ons 'n gebed wil doen. So kom ons sit so en dan bid ons saam. Hear our cry, Almighty God. Listen to our prayer. How long will we have to hide in our homes from the enemy? Where will it strike next? And whom? And what if? Our screens relay a continuous escalation of suffering and death around the world. Panic and anxiety abounds. Our souls are weary from the strain of the life-altering unknowns. Heavenly Father, from the depths of our pain and confusion, we cry out to you. From fear-filled hearts and anxious minds, we plead with you. Rescue us, Father of compassion and grace. We lift up our eyes to you, Lord. In your presence, living water springs forth in the wilderness. You restore our souls. Amen. Baie, baie dankie.